Spain, a land of warriors, castles, and faith. A land where kingdoms rose in glory and crumbled in fire. To understand medieval Spain is to step into a world of unending conflict and breathtaking resilience. It is the story of a peninsula torn between empires and faiths, where the clash of civilizations shaped not just Spain, but the destiny of Europe itself. It begins in the year 711. The Moors, warriors from North Africa, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and brought with them a new religion, Islam, and a new culture that would forever alter the land. In just a few years, the Visigothic kingdom collapsed, and Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled Spain, was born. Cities like Córdoba and Granada became centers of learning, science, and architecture. Their palaces, mosques, and gardens still whisper stories of a golden age. But medieval Spain was never at peace. The Christian kingdoms of the north, Asturias, Leon, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre, refused to surrender. For centuries they pushed back, launching what history remembers as the Reconquista. It was not a single war, but a long, grinding struggle of nearly 800 years. Every battle, every siege, every crusade reshaped the land. Castles rose along the frontiers, villages were burned, and alliances shifted as often as the tides. This was a land of contrasts. On one side, coexistence, Muslims, Christians, and Jews sharing knowledge and living side by side in great cities. On the other, holy war, crusaders riding with the cross on their banners, determined to reclaim Spain for Christianity. By the late Middle Ages, Christian power grew unstoppable. Kingdoms expanded, armies marched south, and the tide of history turned. The fall of Toledo in 1085 was a milestone. The victory at Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 broke the strength of the Almohads, and finally, in 1492, the last Moorish stronghold of Granada fell to Ferdinand and Isabella, marking the end of Muslim rule in Spain. But the story of medieval Spain is not only about conquest. It is about culture, faith, and survival. It is about the rise of Castile and Aragon, the forging of a united Spain, and the dreams of kings who sought both power and eternal glory. This is the tale of medieval Spain, a land of Moors and kings, of castles and crusades, of rise and fall, a story of fire and faith, where the destiny of nations was written in blood and stone. What you are about to witness is not just history. It is the story of a land forged in fire. This video will reveal the epic struggle that shaped medieval Spain for centuries, a struggle between faiths, cultures, and empires, where every victory carved a new destiny, and every defeat left scars that never fully healed. We will uncover how a small band of Muslim warriors crossed the sea in 711 and transformed Iberia into Al-Andalus, one of the most dazzling civilizations of the Middle Ages. A land of mosques, palaces, and libraries where scholars preserved the wisdom of the ancient world, and where art and science flourished, while much of Europe still lived in shadow. But this story is not one-sided. From the mountains of the north, Christian kingdoms refused to surrender. For centuries they launched campaigns, crusades, and alliances, the Great Reconquista, pushing south step by step, determined to reclaim their homeland. We will follow their rise, from the humble beginnings of Asturias to the powerful kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, who would one day unite all of Spain. This journey is filled with legendary moments. The fall of Toledo in 1085, the turning point at Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, and the final fall of Granada in 1492, each event reshaped the map of Spain and echoed across Europe. You will see how kings and caliphs fought, not just with armies, but with ideas, diplomacy, and alliances that shifted like sand. But beyond battles and bloodshed, this video will reveal the cultural heartbeat of medieval Spain. The coexistence and conflict of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The rise of majestic castles and cathedrals, the poetry of Andalusian courts, the chants of Christian monks, and the marketplaces where worlds collided. And at the end of it all, you will understand how Spain emerged from centuries of division into a single kingdom, ready to sail into a new age of exploration and empire. From the fall of Al-Andalus to the rise of Ferdinand and Isabella, this is the story of how medieval Spain became a cornerstone of world history. This is more than a tale of war. It is the promise of a journey, through centuries of glory and ruin, hope and despair, faith and ambition. By the time the story ends, you will see how the rise and fall of great kingdoms in medieval Spain changed not only a nation, but the destiny of the entire world. Imagine walking through Spain in the early Middle Ages. Broken Roman aqueducts still tower over the valleys. Crumbling amphitheaters whisper stories of gladiators. Roads straight as arrows stretch across mountains and rivers, the skeleton of an empire that once ruled the known world. Before the Muslim conquest or the rise of Christian kingdoms, Spain already carried a powerful legacy, the heritage of Rome and the rule of the Visigoths. To understand the struggles of medieval Spain, we must begin here with the foundations laid by these two worlds. For centuries, Hispania, as the Romans called it, was one of the empire's jewels. From the bustling port of Tarraco to the silver mines of Cartagena, the land was rich, fertile, and deeply Romanized. Cities flourished with temples, forums, and theaters. Latin spread across the peninsula, planting the seeds of the Spanish language we know today. Roman law, engineering, and administration created an order that would echo long after the empire's fall. But no empire lasts forever. By the 5th century, Rome was crumbling under the weight of invasions and internal decay. Into this vacuum marched the Visigoths, a Germanic people once feared as barbarians. They swept across Spain, defeated rivals, and by the late 400s established their kingdom with Toledo as its capital. The Visigoths ruled not as outsiders, but as inheritors of Rome's mantle. They kept Roman roads, Roman law, and even adopted Christianity. Their kings, such as Leovigild and Recared, sought to unify the peninsula under one faith and one crown. For over 2 centuries, they created a fragile but enduring kingdom, blending Roman traditions with their own warrior culture. Church councils in Toledo shaped laws and religion, while bishops became powerful voices in politics. The Visigothic code, written in Latin, would later influence medieval Spanish law. It was a land where Roman order and Gothic strength fused into something uniquely Iberian. Yet beneath the surface, cracks appeared. Rival nobles fought for power. Successions often turned bloody. Religious unity was tested as old divisions between Arian Christians and Catholic converts lingered. And at the edges of their kingdom, new threats loomed. By the early 700s, the Visigothic kingdom was weakened, divided, and vulnerable. Little did they know that across the Strait of Gibraltar, a rising power, the armies of Islam, was preparing to strike. How could a kingdom built on the mighty foundation of Rome collapse so suddenly? And how would this fall open the door for one of the most dramatic conquests in medieval history, the Muslim invasion of Spain? The year was 701. On one side of the Strait of Gibraltar stood Spain, a land of castles, crumbling kingdoms, and bitter rivalries. On the other side stretched North Africa, where the banners of Islam danced with the desert wind. No one in Europe could have imagined that a small force, barely 7,000 strong, would cross those narrow waters and change the fate of Spain forever. Spain at that time was ruled by the Visigoths, but their kingdom was weakened from within. Civil wars had torn the land apart. Noble families plotted against each other, and when Roderick rose to power as king, many refused to accept him. In desperation, some rival nobles reached across the sea for help, calling upon a new power rising in the Muslim world. That one invitation would open the gates to an invasion no one could stop. In North Africa, the Umayyad Caliphate had already swept across half the known world, from Arabia to Egypt, across Libya, and into Morocco. Their armies were fast, disciplined, and filled with both ambition and faith. Among their generals was Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber commander chosen to lead the daring expedition across the sea. In the spring of 711, Tariq landed on the rocky shore of Spain. The mountain above him would one day bear his name, Jabal Tariq or Gibraltar. Legend says that once his soldiers were ashore, he gave an order that shocked them all. He burned their ships. With the sea at their backs and only the enemy ahead, Tariq declared, "There is no escape but in victory." Whether true or myth, the story captured the spirit of men who knew there was no turning back. When King Roderick learned of the invasion, he marched south with a massive army, determined to crush the intruders. The two sides met at the Battle of Guadalete. It should have been an easy victory for the Visigoths. They outnumbered Tariq's men, but betrayal from rival nobles shattered their lines. As chaos spread, Roderick himself vanished, never seen again. Some say he was killed, others that he fled and drowned in the river. Whatever the truth, the Visigothic kingdom collapsed in a single devastating blow. After Guadalete, the Muslim advance became a storm. Córdoba, Seville, and even Toledo, the Visigothic capital, fell one after another. Within just a few years, almost the entire peninsula was under their control. Only the northern mountains held small pockets of Christian resistance. Europe watched in disbelief. The entire Christian kingdom that had stood for centuries was swept away by an army from across the sea. But conquest was only the beginning. The Moors brought not just soldiers, but a new vision of civilization. Their language, their faith, their sciences, and their culture would take root in Spain. This was the birth of Al-Andalus, a land unlike any in Europe. How could such a small force topple an entire kingdom? And how would this conquest set the stage for centuries of brilliance, conflict, and struggle on the Iberian Peninsula? From the ashes of conquest, a new world began to take shape. The Muslim rulers called their new land Al-Andalus. To Europe, it was a shock. A piece of the Islamic world planted deep inside Christian soil. But to those who lived there, it soon became something more. A land of dazzling cities, grand mosques, and a fusion of cultures that would make it one of the brightest centers of the Middle Ages. Córdoba became the jewel of Al-Andalus. By the 10th century, it was not just a city, it was a marvel. Its streets were lit with lamps at night, a wonder unknown to the rest of Europe. Public baths, flowing water, and paved roads spoke of a sophistication that stunned visiting travelers. At a time when most European towns were small and muddy, Córdoba glittered with libraries that held hundreds of thousands of books. Knowledge was not just preserved here, it was celebrated. The blending of cultures gave Al-Andalus its unique character. Arabs, Berbers, Jews, Christians, and converted Muslims lived together, exchanging ideas, languages, and traditions. While not always equal in rights, these communities created a society where tolerance and scholarship allowed knowledge to flourish. Greek philosophy, preserved through Arabic translations, flowed into Spain. Mathematics from India, astronomy from Persia, and medicine from the Arab world all found a home here. Art and architecture reached heights unseen in centuries. The great Mosque of Córdoba, with its endless rows of arches and pillars, became a symbol of Islamic Spain's grandeur. Later, Granada would rise as a center of beauty, crowned by the Alhambra, a palace where poetry was carved into walls and water ran through gardens designed like paradise itself. These monuments still stand today as whispers of a lost golden age, but Al-Andalus was not only about stone and books. It was also a land of trade and agriculture. Irrigation systems turned dry fields into fertile gardens. Silk, spices, and precious goods flowed in from Africa and the Middle East, making the cities of Spain wealthy and cosmopolitan. Markets buzzed with life, merchants spoke many tongues, and the peninsula became a crossroads of the known world. For Christian Europe, Al-Andalus was both a wonder and a threat. Its brilliance highlighted the darkness of the early medieval world north of the Pyrenees. Kings and monks in France and Germany marveled at its achievements, even as they feared the power of Islam in Europe. This was not the Spain of Rome or the Visigoths. This was something entirely new, a civilization where East met West, where faith and reason mingled, and where knowledge became power. Yet even in its rise, Al-Andalus carried the seeds of future conflict. How long could such a diverse land hold together? Could harmony survive in a world where religion and power always clashed? While Muslim banners flew over Toledo, Seville, and Córdoba, far away in the rugged mountains of northern Spain, a different story was being written. Here in the misty valleys of Asturias, Leon, and Navarre, tiny Christian kingdoms clung to survival. They were weak, poor, and outnumbered, yet they carried within them the spark of resistance that would one day ignite the Reconquista. The mountains gave them protection. Moorish armies, swift on the plains, found it harder to control these harsh and rocky lands. In Asturias, a small band of warriors gathered under the leadership of a man named Pelayo. According to legend, in the year 722, Pelayo and his followers faced a much larger Muslim force at the Battle of Covadonga. Against all odds, the Christians claimed victory. Though small in scale, this battle became a symbol of hope, proof that the Moors could be resisted, and that Spain's Christian spirit was not entirely broken. Asturias was the first flame, but it was not alone. Over the centuries, Leon and Navarre also emerged as centers of Christian resistance. These kingdoms were fragile, often divided by rival dynasties and noble quarrels. Yet they endured. Protected by geography and fueled by faith, they fought skirmishes, raided enemy strongholds, and slowly expanded their influence. For the Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus, these mountain kingdoms seemed insignificant, hardly worth their full attention. After all, they controlled the rich lands of the south, the cities of splendor, the fertile valleys. Why worry about a few rebels hidden in the hills? Yet history would prove that underestimating them was a grave mistake. The Christians of the north carried more than swords. They carried memory. The memory of Visigothic Spain, the dream of lost Toledo, and the determination to one day reclaim their land. Priests and kings alike spoke of a holy mission, a slow but certain return. It was not yet called the Reconquista, but the idea was already alive. In the meantime, life in these small kingdoms was harsh. Winters were long, food scarce, and survival uncertain. But hardship forged resilience. Out of these mountains came warriors hardened by struggle, men and women who learned to endure and to fight for every inch of soil. The story of Christian resistance was not one of instant triumph, but of patience. For centuries, Asturias, Leon, and Navarre seemed like flickering candles against the blazing light of Al-Andalus. Yet those candles would not go out. How could such small, fragile kingdoms, hidden in the shadow of a powerful empire, one day challenge and even conquer the mighty Moors? The answer lay in their faith, their mountains, and their unyielding will to survive. From the high peaks of Asturias to the valleys of Leon and Navarre, the tiny Christian kingdoms had survived. But survival was not enough. A new idea was growing in their hearts, the idea of reclaiming Spain. What began as scattered resistance in the mountains slowly transformed into a centuries-long holy struggle. History would call it the Reconquista. The Reconquista did not start with mighty armies or grand victories. It began with raids, small pushes southward, and the retaking of isolated fortresses. Each battle was as much about survival as it was about faith. For the Christians, this was more than war. It was a mission, a divine duty to restore the land once ruled by their ancestors. Priests blessed their banners, kings prayed before marches, and chronicles spoke of a holy purpose, to drive out the Moors. The early stages were fragile. Muslim armies still controlled the rich lands of the south, their cities thriving with trade and learning. Against them, the northern kingdoms were small, divided, and often at war with one another. Sometimes they even allied with Muslim rulers when it suited them. The Reconquista was not a straight path, but a long, winding struggle of victories and defeats. Yet over the centuries, momentum slowly shifted. With each generation, Christian rulers pushed a little further south. Castles rose on newly captured hills. Fields once under Moorish plows became Christian farmland. Fortresses along the frontier became symbols of both defiance and hope. One of the key turning points was the rise of Leon and later Castile, powerful kingdoms that grew from those early mountain strongholds. Their kings saw themselves not just as rulers of small territories, but as heirs to all of Spain. Their ambition fueled the Reconquista with new energy. For the Moors, the pressure was constant. Internal divisions weakened Al-Andalus. Rival Muslim rulers often fought one another as fiercely as they resisted Christian advances. While Córdoba and Granada dazzled with culture, the unity of Muslim Spain cracked over time, giving the Christians opportunities to strike. The Reconquista stretched on for centuries, longer than any other war in medieval history. Generations were born and died under its shadow. Some years brought victories, others crushing defeats, but the idea never died. The Christians of Spain believed that one day the land would be theirs again. What made the Reconquista so remarkable was its endurance. Few wars in history lasted nearly 800 years. It was not a single campaign, but a relentless series of struggles, sieges, and resettlements, each one slowly reshaping the map of Spain. How could small mountain kingdoms, once clinging to survival, launch a movement that would span centuries and eventually transform the destiny of a whole continent? The answer lay in their faith, their persistence, and the belief that history itself was on their side. Spain became a land of stone and fire. For centuries, war never ceased. Armies marched, kingdoms clashed, and frontiers shifted like waves on the shore. Out of this endless conflict rose the very symbols of medieval Spain, castles and fortresses. At first they were simple structures, wooden towers on hills, built in haste to guard against raids. But as the struggle deepened, those towers grew into fortresses of stone. Castles crowned the mountains, their towers watching over valleys. Thick walls rose above rivers and plains, guarding towns and trade routes. Every frontier became a chessboard of strongholds. The Moors built some of the earliest great fortresses, blending Roman and Islamic designs. Their walls curved gracefully, yet stood firm against siege engines. Cities like Toledo and Zaragoza bristled with defenses. When the Christians advanced, they adopted and expanded these techniques. Soon, both sides were locked in a race to build mightier fortresses, stronger walls, and more elaborate defenses. Castles were not just military bases. They were symbols of power. A king's strength could be measured by how many castles flew his banner. Nobles built their own, turning the landscape into a mosaic of stone strongholds. Villagers lived in their shadows, seeking protection within their walls when armies approached. Life and war became inseparable from the rise of the castle, and war came often. Each siege was a test of endurance. Soldiers hurled stones with catapults, tunneled beneath walls, or scaled towers with ladders. Defenders rained arrows, boiling oil, and fire upon their attackers. Some sieges lasted months, even years. To take a fortress was not just to win a battle, it was to change the balance of power in a whole region. Among these castles, some became legends. The Alcázar of Segovia, perched on a rocky cliff like a ship of stone. The fortress of Alhambra in Granada, where walls were carved like lace but strong as iron. Across Spain, ruins still stand today, silent witnesses to centuries of struggle. The rise of castles also shaped the very identity of Spain. Unlike the open fields of northern Europe, the Iberian Peninsula became a land of fortresses, where every horizon held a tower. Travel meant passing from one castle's shadow to another, through lands marked by walls, gates, and battlements. To the people of medieval Spain, the castle was both shield and prison. It protected them from enemies, but also reminded them that war was never far away. Every stone spoke of blood spilled, battles fought, and kingdoms won or lost. How did this world of castles, born of endless war, shape the spirit of medieval Spain? And how would these fortresses stand as both guardians and graveyards in the long, brutal centuries of the Reconquista? From the rugged mountains of the north, small Christian kingdoms rose, fighting for survival against the great power of Al-Andalus. Among them, two would grow stronger than the rest, Leon and Castile. Leon began as a humble outpost of resistance, forged in the shadows of the old Roman roads. Its kings dreamed of restoring order to a fractured land, carrying the banner of Christianity deeper into Iberia. Castile at first was only a frontier province, its name born from its countless castles guarding the border. But hardship forged strength. The men of Castile became known for their iron will, hardened by endless battle against Muslim armies and rival Christian lords alike. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Leon and Castile were no longer minor players. They became the beating heart of the Reconquista. Their kings commanded armies that marched south, reclaiming valleys, rivers, and fertile lands from Moorish rule. Castles multiplied across the land, each stone laid not just for defense but as a statement. We are here to stay. The kingdoms grew not only through war, but also through faith and culture. Monasteries spread across the land, preserving ancient texts, teaching new generations and binding the people together under Christianity. Leon's laws and governance provided a foundation for what would later become the Kingdom of Spain. Castile, with its restless warriors, pushed the frontiers ever forward, embodying the spirit of expansion. Sometimes united, sometimes divided, Leon and Castile were bound by fate. Their crowns passed between dynasties, their kings rivaled and allied with each other, but together they shaped the destiny of Iberia. When Leon's strength waned, Castile surged forward, taking leadership in the long war for Spain's soul. By the High Middle Ages, Castile stood as one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. Its armies feared, its language spreading across the peninsula. Leon, though overshadowed, remained the root from which Castile drew much of its law, culture, and identity. Together they laid the foundation of a united Spain. The story of Leon and Castile is one of resilience, two kingdoms forged in fire, rising from the northern mountains to challenge empires, and preparing the stage for the final act of the Reconquista. Without them, the dream of a united Spain would never have been possible. While Christian kingdoms struggled in the north, the south of Spain entered an age of brilliance that dazzled the medieval world. This was Al-Andalus, a land where knowledge, culture, and prosperity flourished under Muslim rule. Cities like Córdoba, Granada, and Seville became jewels of Europe. Córdoba, in particular, shone like a star. By the 10th century, it was one of the largest cities on earth, with paved streets, streetlights, libraries, hospitals, and gardens that astonished travelers. While much of Europe lived in darkness, Córdoba had libraries holding hundreds of thousands of books. Scholars came from across the known world, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, to study philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. This was a society where learning was valued above all. Muslim rulers invited philosophers from the East, translators from the West, and poets from everywhere. Works of Aristotle and Plato, long forgotten in Europe, were translated into Arabic, preserved, and later passed back into Latin, helping ignite the European Renaissance centuries later. Architecture, too, reached breathtaking heights. The great Mosque of Córdoba rose with its forest of red and white arches, a marvel of harmony and design. In Granada, the foundations were laid for the future splendor of the Alhambra, a palace that still whispers stories of Moorish kings. Everywhere, aqueducts, gardens, and palaces reflected the blending of Roman engineering, Islamic art, and Spanish spirit. It wasn't only science and architecture, culture thrived. Poets wrote verses that blended faith and passion, music filled the palaces, and artisans created silk, ceramics, and weapons admired across Europe. Trade routes carried spices, silk, and ideas between Al-Andalus and the wider Islamic world, making Spain a crossroads of civilizations. But perhaps most remarkable was the tolerance that defined much of Al-Andalus. Though not perfect, it was a society where Muslims, Christians, and Jews, known as the people of the book, often lived side by side. Jewish scholars like Maimonides and Christian thinkers found protection and opportunity under Muslim rule. This coexistence, fragile yet real, gave Al-Andalus a richness unmatched elsewhere in medieval Europe. To outsiders, Al-Andalus seemed like a paradise, prosperous, cultured, and enlightened. To its people, it was proof that Spain could be more than a battlefield. It could be a beacon of knowledge, a land where science and art walked hand in hand. The glory of Al-Andalus would not last forever. Conflict, rivalry, and war would eventually tear it apart. But for centuries, it stood as a golden chapter in Spain's history, a time when the land of castles and warriors became, for a moment, the center of the civilized world. Once the shining heart of Al-Andalus, Córdoba was the envy of Europe. Its libraries held 500,000 books. Its streets were lit at night, when even Paris and London lay in darkness. Scholars, merchants, and poets called it the jewel of the West. But like many golden ages in history, the seeds of decline were already being sown. Power struggles began to tear at the fabric of the Great Caliphate. After the height of its glory under the Umayyad rulers, Córdoba fell victim to civil wars known as the Fitna. Rival princes, generals, and religious leaders fought for control. Instead of standing united against enemies abroad, Muslim Spain began fighting itself from within. The once mighty caliphate broke apart. Córdoba, once the seat of power, saw its authority challenged on every side. By the early 11th century, what had been a single powerful kingdom split into dozens of smaller states, known as taifas. Each taifa was centered around a city: Seville, Toledo, Zaragoza, Granada, ruled by local kings who often valued survival and luxury over unity. At first, these taifas kept alive some of Córdoba's brilliance. They competed to outshine one another with palaces, poetry, and patronage of scholars. But their weakness was clear. Divided, they could not resist pressure from the rising Christian kingdoms in the north. One by one, they began paying tribute to Christian kings, giving gold in exchange for fragile peace. Córdoba itself, once unchallenged, fell into decline. Its palaces were looted, its treasures scattered, and its political power destroyed. The great city that had been the pride of the Islamic world in the West became just another fractured piece in Spain's endless wars. The fall of Córdoba was not only the collapse of a city, it was the symbolic and of Muslim unity in Spain. The dream of a united Al-Andalus died, replaced by fragile kingdoms constantly under threat. Yet out of this decline came a new chapter. The Christian kingdoms saw opportunity. The Reconquista gained momentum, and from North Africa, powerful Muslim dynasties like the Almoravids and Almohads would later sweep in, trying to save what was left of Muslim Spain. But the age of Córdoba, the golden beacon of knowledge and power, was gone. Its fall was the moment when Al-Andalus stopped being a dominant empire and became a land fighting for survival. As Córdoba's power crumbled and the once mighty caliphate split into taifas, the stage was set for centuries of brutal conflict. Spain became a battlefield where faith and ambition collided. On one side, Christian kings claimed they were fighting to reclaim land stolen from their ancestors. On the other, Moorish rulers and warriors believed they were defending the glory of Islam and their place in Al-Andalus. These wars were never just about territory. They were about identity, religion, and survival. Each castle on a hill, each walled city became more than stone and mortar. It became a symbol of God's favor. Victories were celebrated as divine proof, defeats mourned as punishment from heaven. The Christian kingdoms of Leon, Castile, Navarre, and Aragon began pushing south. They sent armies of armored knights, banners flying with the cross inspired by the same spirit that fueled the Crusades in the Holy Land. Their chronicles spoke of holy war, of reclaiming Spain for Christendom. Priests blessed the soldiers before battle, and victory was preached as destiny. The Moors, too, saw these wars through the lens of faith. Muslim rulers called upon North African allies, the fierce Almoravids and later the Almohads, to bring their holy warriors across the sea. Jihad was declared, and thousands answered the call to defend Al-Andalus. In cities like Seville and Granada, sermons urged resistance, portraying every clash as part of a cosmic struggle between belief and unbelief. The battles themselves were ferocious. Steel clashed against steel. Arrows darkened the skies and siege engines battered walls that had stood for centuries. Towns changed hands again and again, sometimes in fire and blood, sometimes through fragile truces and betrayals. One of the most famous confrontations was the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, 1212. Here a united Christian force dealt a crushing blow to the Almohads, breaking their power in Spain. For the Christians, it was proof that God was on their side. For the Moors, it was a devastating loss that would haunt Al-Andalus for generations. Yet for all the talk of faith, these wars were also about power. Kings on both sides made alliances across religious lines when it suited them. Christian rulers accepted gold from Muslim taifas, and Moorish kings sometimes fought alongside Christian knights against rival Muslim states. Still, the narrative that echoed through the centuries was one of holy war, of Christians marching with the cross and Moors fighting under the crescent. Each battle was more than a clash of armies. It was a struggle that shaped the destiny of Spain itself. And as the centuries wore on, the line between victory and defeat grew thin. For every fortress taken, another was lost. For every victory celebrated as divine, another disaster cast doubt. But one truth remained clear. In Spain, faith and power were inseparable, and the clash between the two would decide the fate of the land. While the kingdoms of Leon and Castile pushed southward across the mountains of Spain, another power was quietly rising in the northeast, Aragon. Born in the rugged lands near the Pyrenees, the crown of Aragon was not content with fighting only on Spanish soil. Instead, it looked outward, toward the glittering waters of the Mediterranean. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Aragon transformed itself from a small Christian stronghold into a mighty maritime empire. Its kings and merchants realized that wealth and power could be found not only in conquering Moorish lands at home, but also in commanding the seas. With skilled sailors and fearless knights, Aragon expanded its reach across the Mediterranean world. First, Aragon secured its position in Iberia by joining the Reconquista, capturing territories from the Moors in eastern Spain, but its ambitions stretched further. The marriage of the Crown of Aragon with the County of Barcelona gave it ports, ships, and access to trade routes that connected Spain with Italy, North Africa, and beyond. Suddenly, Aragon was not just a landlocked kingdom, it was a gateway to the Mediterranean. From there, the Crown of Aragon grew bold. Its fleet sailed to Sicily, Sardinia, and Naples, bringing these lands under Aragonese influence. The banner of Aragon began to fly over distant castles, and its kings became not just rulers of a Spanish kingdom, but players in the politics of Europe. The Mediterranean, once dominated by Italian republics like Genoa and Venice, now had to reckon with the rising star of Aragon. This expansion gave Aragon immense wealth. Trade flourished in its ports. Merchants carried goods from across the known world, silks from the east, spices from North Africa, and silver from Spain itself. Scholars and sailors brought knowledge of navigation, law, and culture, turning cities like Barcelona and Valencia into centers of power and learning. But Aragon's rise was not without conflict. Its ambitions brought it into rivalry with other great powers, the Moors of North Africa, the kingdoms of France, and the Italian city-states. Wars were fought not only on land but on the sea, where galleys clashed in battles that decided the fate of islands and ports. By the late Middle Ages, the Crown of Aragon stood as one of the strongest forces in the Mediterranean. It was no longer just a participant in the Reconquista. It was a kingdom with global ambitions. Its rise showed that the story of medieval Spain was not only about battles between Christians and Moors within Iberia, but also about how Spanish kingdoms reached beyond their borders, shaping the destiny of Europe and the wider world. Aragon's journey from mountain stronghold to Mediterranean empire marked a turning point in Spanish history and laid the foundation for the even greater union that would one day create modern Spain. The year was 1212. For centuries, the Christian kingdoms of the north had slowly chipped away at Muslim rule in Spain. Yet the power of the Almohads, fierce warriors from North Africa, still loomed over Al-Andalus. Their empire stretched across Morocco and southern Spain, and their armies were vast. Many believed Christian Spain would never break through their strength. But then came Las Navas de Tolosa, a battle that would change the destiny of Iberia forever. It began with a rare moment of unity. Rival Christian kingdoms, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre, put aside their differences. They were joined by crusaders from across Europe, answering the call of Pope Innocent III, who declared the fight a holy war. Thousands marched south, banners bearing the cross, hearts burning with the promise of victory. Facing them was the might of the Almohad Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir, who had gathered one of the largest Muslim armies ever seen on Spanish soil. The clash was set near the mountain passes of the Sierra Morena. The battle was fierce and chaotic. At first, the Almohads held strong, their lines seemingly unbreakable. Archers rained arrows, cavalry thundered across the plains, and the Christians struggled to push forward. But then, legend says, a daring charge by the Christian knights broke through the enemy's defenses. King Alfonso VIII of Castile, King Sancho VII of Navarre, and King Peter II of Aragon all led their men with extraordinary courage. One moment in particular became legendary. Sancho of Navarre's troops reportedly cut through the chains that protected the caliph's personal guard, breaking the heart of the Muslim defense. Panic spread, and the once mighty Almohad army began to collapse. By the end of the day, it was a stunning victory for the Christians. The Almohads were crushed. Thousands lay dead on the battlefield. The great power of North Africa that had once threatened to dominate Spain was broken forever. The consequences were enormous. Las Navas de Tolosa marked a turning point in the Reconquista. From that moment on, the Christian kingdoms gained momentum, pushing steadily southward. Cities like Córdoba, Seville, and eventually Granada all became targets for future campaigns. For the Moors, it was the beginning of the end. But this battle was more than just a military triumph. It was symbolic. To the Christians, it was proof that God was on their side, that their centuries-long struggle was destined for victory. To the Muslims of Spain, it was a devastating blow to unity and confidence. Las Navas de Tolosa did not end the Reconquista in one stroke, but it shattered the balance of power. From 1212 onward, the tide had turned and the fate of medieval Spain was set on an irreversible path. By the late Middle Ages, the Reconquista had reduced Muslim Spain to a single kingdom, Granada. While Córdoba, Seville, and Toledo had fallen, Granada stood alone, clinging to survival as the last Moorish stronghold in Iberia. It was ruled by the Nasrid dynasty, who established their power in the 13th century. Tucked away in the rugged mountains of Andalusia, Granada was difficult to conquer. Its natural defenses, steep hills, narrow passes, and high walls, gave it strength. But its true survival came from diplomacy and strategy. The Nasrids were masters of playing a dangerous game, paying tribute to powerful Christian monarchs, forging alliances when necessary, and exploiting rivalries among their enemies. Yet, Granada was not merely a kingdom of survival, it was a kingdom of brilliance. The city flourished as a center of art, science, and trade. Merchants filled its bustling bazaars with silks, spices, and precious ceramics. Poets and scholars found patronage at its courts, keeping alive the intellectual traditions of Al-Andalus. At the heart of this cultural splendor stood the Alhambra, a breathtaking fortress palace that still stuns the world today. With delicate arches, flowing fountains, and walls inscribed with poetry, it was both a symbol of Nasrid power and a masterpiece of Islamic architecture. To walk its courtyards was to glimpse the last golden spark of Moorish Spain, but beneath the beauty lay fragility. Granada survived not by strength alone, but by concessions. Heavy tribute payments to Castile drained its treasury. Dynastic quarrels and betrayals weakened its rulers. And year by year, Christian power grew stronger, surrounding Granada from every side. Still, for more than 250 years, Granada endured. It was a beacon of resistance, the final chapter of Al-Andalus, standing long after other kingdoms had crumbled. To its people, it was more than a city. It was hope, faith, and identity preserved in stone. Granada was the last jewel of Moorish Spain. And though its fall would come, the legacy of its culture and architecture ensured that it would never be forgotten. In the twilight of medieval Spain, Granada shone like a flame against the darkness of inevitability. For centuries, Christian Spain had been divided. Castile and Aragon, though powerful, often acted as rivals, each pursuing its own ambitions. But in 1469, a single marriage changed everything. When Ferdinand of Aragon wed Isabella of Castile, Spain's two greatest Christian kingdoms were bound together. What began as a political alliance soon became the cornerstone of a new united Spain. This union was more than just a royal marriage. It was the merging of two forces that would reshape the future of Iberia. Castile brought vast lands, wealth, and military strength. Aragon added its Mediterranean empire, its ports, and its influence across Europe. Together, Ferdinand and Isabella created a partnership that balanced power and ambition. They were not rulers who competed with one another, but monarchs who shared a single vision: the unification of Spain under Christian rule. The marriage was also symbolic. For generations, Christian kings had dreamed of ending Muslim power in Spain. Now, with Castile and Aragon united, that dream seemed within reach. Ferdinand and Isabella styled themselves as Los Reyes Católicos, the Catholic monarchs, defenders of the faith and leaders of a new age. Their rule brought stability to lands long divided by feuds and rivalries. Nobles who once acted like warlords were forced into loyalty. The crown grew stronger than ever before. With their combined armies and resources, Ferdinand and Isabella could finally direct their power southward, toward Granada, the last Moorish kingdom. But their ambitions stretched even further. Their marriage did not just unite Spain politically, it also positioned the kingdom to become a rising power in Europe. Through alliances, wars, and diplomacy, the Catholic monarchs extended their influence far beyond the Iberian Peninsula. Still, their greatest and most immediate goal was clear: the completion of the Reconquista. For Ferdinand and Isabella, Granada was more than a city. It was the final obstacle to a united Christian Spain. And with their marriage, the resources and will to finish the centuries-long struggle were finally in place. The union of Castile and Aragon was the turning point. It was the moment when scattered Christian kingdoms transformed into a single determined force. A force that would not only end Moorish rule in Spain, but soon launch Spain into a golden age of empire and discovery. What began with a marriage would end with a new Spain and a new chapter in world history. For nearly 8 centuries, the crescent moon of Islam had shone over Spain. From Córdoba's great mosque to the dazzling palaces of Granada, Al-Andalus had been a beacon of culture, learning, and power. But by the late 15th century, only one Muslim kingdom remained: the Nasrid Emirate of Granada. Granada was a jewel of the south, nestled against the snow-capped Sierra Nevada, its heart guarded by the Alhambra, a fortress palace of breathtaking beauty. For decades, it had survived by paying tribute to Castile and playing politics between Christian and Muslim powers. But the world was changing. With Ferdinand and Isabella now united as the Catholic monarchs, Granada's fate was sealed. In 1482, war began. It was not a quick campaign, but a grueling decade of sieges, battles, and betrayals. One by one, Granada's cities fell: Ronda, Malaga, Loja, until only the capital remained. Inside the Alhambra, The young ruler Boabdil Muhammad XIV struggled to hold his kingdom together, torn between loyalty to his people and the crushing reality of defeat. By late 1491, Granada was encircled. Ferdinand and Isabella built entire siege towns, such as Santa Fe, to starve the city into submission. Winter came. Supplies dwindled. Morale collapsed. The once proud kingdom that had dazzled the world now faced its final hour. On January 2, 1492, Boabdil surrendered the keys of Granada to Ferdinand and Isabella. The scene was both tragic and monumental. The Catholic monarchs rode into the Alhambra, their banners replacing the crescent with the cross. For the first time in centuries, the Reconquista was complete. Spain was united under Christian rule. Legend tells that as Boabdil left Granada, he looked back at the city from a mountain pass. Tears welled in his eyes. His mother, standing beside him, is said to have whispered, "Do not weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." Whether myth or truth, the story captures the sorrow of an age ending. The fall of Granada was more than just a military victory. It was the turning of a page in history. The last Moorish stronghold in Spain was gone, but its memory lived on in the Alhambra's walls, in the poetry of its gardens, and in the echoes of a lost civilization. It did not just mark the fall of Granada, it marked the birth of a new Spain. Within months, Columbus would sail west under the banner of the Catholic monarchs, carrying Spain's destiny far beyond the mountains of Andalusia. The Reconquista was over, but the Age of Empire was just beginning. The Reconquista ended with the fall of Granada in 1492, but Spain's story did not close there. Victory brought triumph, yet it also unleashed one of the darkest chapters in its history. For centuries, Jews, Christians, and Muslims had lived side by side in Spain. In Córdoba, Toledo, and Granada, Jewish scholars translated ancient texts, Muslim architects raised breathtaking palaces, and Christian monks preserved learning. This coexistence, imperfect but real, had made Al-Andalus a land of brilliance. But in the new Catholic Spain, unity meant something else. One faith, one crown, one kingdom. Just months after Granada's surrender, Ferdinand and Isabella issued the Edict of Expulsion. Spain's Jews, who had thrived for over 1,000 years, were given an impossible choice: convert to Christianity or leave forever. Tens of thousands left their homes, carrying nothing but memories, while others, called conversos, converted under fear and suspicion. Many who stayed were accused of secretly practicing Judaism and faced the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition, torture, trials, and public burnings in the name of religious purity. The Muslims of Granada were promised tolerance in the surrender terms. At first they were allowed to keep their faith, their language, and their customs, but promises soon broke. Forced conversions began. Mosques were turned into churches. Arabic books were burned in public squares. By the early 16th century, Spain's once proud Muslim population had dwindled, their culture crushed, their voices silenced. Those who converted, known as Moriscos, lived under constant suspicion, until even they were expelled in the 17th century. The loss was staggering. Spain had cast out its jewelers, doctors, philosophers, and merchants. Cities that once thrived with cultural exchange grew quieter, poorer, less diverse. A land that had been a beacon of science, trade, and tolerance was reshaped into a rigid, uniform kingdom, strong in faith, but weaker in spirit. And yet, in the minds of those expelled, Spain never died. Jews carried the memory of Sepharad across the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and beyond. Muslims remembered the gardens of Granada, the mosques of Córdoba, the poetry of Al-Andalus. A world had ended, but its echo still lingers in Spain's architecture, its music, its very soul. The expulsion of Jews and Muslims was more than just policy. It was the silencing of centuries of shared history. A chapter closed not with glory, but with sorrow. Spain had won its unity, but at the cost of its greatest richness, its diversity. The story of medieval Spain is not just about wars and kings. It is about the deep scars and shining achievements that centuries of clash and coexistence left behind. Spain, more than any other land in Europe, became a mosaic, shaped by Romans, Visigoths, Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Walk through Spain today, and you can still feel it. The soaring cathedrals of Leon and Burgos tell the tale of Christian devotion and victory. The Alhambra in Granada whispers of Moorish elegance, its walls still glowing with verses of the Quran. Toledo, the city of three cultures, holds the memory of a place where Christians, Muslims, and Jews once worked side by side. Every stone, every arch, every fortress is a piece of this layered history. Spain's identity was forged in conflict, but also in exchange. From the Moors came advances in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and irrigation. From the Jews came philosophy, poetry, and the translation of ancient wisdom. From the Christians came the unifying vision of a kingdom tied to Rome and the Catholic faith. Together, these influences created something unique, a culture both European and yet touched by the wider world. But the legacy is not only cultural, it is also emotional. The Reconquista gave Spain its warrior spirit, a tradition of knights, castles, and epic battles. Yet it also left wounds, memories of intolerance, exile, and the silencing of voices that once enriched the land. The Spanish Inquisition, the expulsions, and the destruction of Al-Andalus cast long shadows over the triumphs. Still, out of that mixture of glory and tragedy, emerged the Spain that would later sail across oceans, carrying its language, faith, and traditions to the New World. The discipline of the knights, the ambition of the monarchs, and the cultural blending of centuries gave Spain the power to stand at the dawn of a global age. The legacy of medieval Spain is this: a land of contrasts. Cross and crescent, sword and prayer, harmony and division, a place where worlds collided. And out of that collision came both brilliance and bloodshed. And though empires rise and fall, the memory of medieval Spain endures. In its castles on the hills, in the haunting beauty of flamenco, in the very rhythm of Spanish life. It was never just history, it became identity. From Moorish palaces to Christian cathedrals, from conquest to unity, medieval Spain was never just a land. It was a stage where the greatest human struggles played out. Faith and fear, glory and ruin, dreams and despair. Close your eyes and you can almost hear it. The clash of steel on castle walls, the echo of the muezzin's call over Córdoba, the toll of church bells in Leon. Each sound, a reminder that this was a land where worlds collided. For nearly 800 years, Spain was a crossroads of civilizations. Muslim poets wrote by the light of oil lamps, while Christian knights sharpened their swords. Jewish scholars translated the wisdom of the ancients, keeping knowledge alive for generations to come. And yet, side by side with beauty came bloodshed. Side by side with wisdom came war. In the end, the story of medieval Spain is not just about who won or lost. It is about the price of unity and the cost of division. The fall of Granada in 1492 was more than the end of Moorish rule. It was the end of an era of diversity, an era where three great cultures had once walked the same streets. But even as the banners of Ferdinand and Isabella flew over the Alhambra, the legacy of Al-Andalus, of castles and kingdoms, of scholars and saints lived on. The Spain that emerged from the Middle Ages was scarred, but also strong. A Spain ready to sail into the unknown seas, to discover new worlds, to carry its culture far beyond its borders. Medieval Spain left behind a lesson for us all, that civilizations rise not only through conquest, but through knowledge. That faith can inspire greatness, but also unleash destruction. That unity forged by the sword is powerful, but fragile. So when you walk through the shadowed halls of the Alhambra, or stand beneath the towering spires of a Gothic cathedral, remember this: medieval Spain was more than history. It was a dream, a struggle, a crucible of human ambition, and in its ruins and wonders it whispers still,